Welcome to Oracle Eyes. Ukrainian voices of freedom began to resound even from Russian cities. The freedom movement, initiated by the Free Russian Legion in the city of Belgorod, increased its influence over time and spread to other cities of Russia. The effects of the war after Belgorod crossed the Sea of Azov beyond the Crimean Peninsula and reached as far as the Russian cities of Krasnodar, Bryansk, and Rostov. The Russian army's missile retaliation against the cities of Kiev and southern Ukraine did not deter the Ukrainians. The Great Attack, which started with the great breakthrough of the Russian Freedom Legion to the city of Belgorod in Russia, also targeted Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk, and Mariupol with long-range missiles and UAVs. At the same time, Ukraine launched a massive wave of attacks on Russia's southern and western cities to cut Russian logistics lines and paralyze the main supply routes of the Russian army. The most critical of these took place in the Krasnodar and Rostov region in the south. The war had now moved to Russia. An attack occurred in the Rostov region near Krasnodar, one of the Russian cities, recently. Rostov and Krasnodar on the coasts of the Azov Sea, which form the southern cities of Russia, are the main supply points of the Russian army on the Crimean and Donbass fronts. Russian air defense systems went on alert after the Ukrainian drone and missile attack in Rostov. The governor of Rostov Oblast in the Russian Federation, Vasily Golubev, claimed that the Russian air defense shot down a Ukrainian missile in the Morozovsk region, where there is a military airspace. The Ukrainian side also shared critical statements regarding the attacks, which caused panic and anxiety to the residents of the region. Ukrainian military channels reported an attack on a Russian airfield at the same time as a missile crashed in Krasnodar. These statements confirmed that the Ukrainians had hit the Russian military base in Rostov. Witnesses also reported hearing the sound of a moped before the two explosions occurred in Krasnodar in southern Russia. Among the claims that Ukraine attacked Russia, the first video footage of the attacks on the Russian airbase in Rostov appeared. Video footage showed a drone crashing into military installations in Krasnodar in southern Russia, about a 6-hour drive from the Ukrainian border. In the video frames, the concerns of Krasnodar residents and their escape after the explosions were among the remarkable details. On the other hand, the Russian authorities continued their statements in order not to cause an atmosphere of concern in Krasnodar. Russian media agency Baza claimed that the attack on the military airfield in the Rostov region was averted after the successful downing of a missile moving at the speed of 5,000 kilometers per hour at an altitude of 17 kilometers. Currently, Russian intelligence officials are working to detect and collect parts of the missile that was shot down in Krasnodar. These operations are vital to carry out a detailed analysis and to determine the missile type, its source, as well as the possible target of an attack. According to a set of assumptions, the Grom-2 tactical missile struck the Russian military base in Rostov because the range of these missiles is enough to hit from such a distance, but there are no official results on this yet. On the other hand, according to Krasnodar Mayor Yevgeny Naumov, the attack damaged an office building and a residential building in Morskaya Street. But one of the most important details of these attacks was that the military airspace in Rostov, which served as a base for Russian bombers, was located 3 kilometers from Morozovsk. This situation involved a serious risk factor for the Russian Air Force, because the Russian Air Force often used this airbase to carry out offensive operations on Ukrainian territory. The Russian military base, which was used to attack Ukrainian territory from the Crimean direction, played an important role in the occupation of cities such as Berdyansk and Mariupol. But it is unclear whether the bombers currently at the Rostov airbase were harmed by this attack. According to the data of intelligence reports, Russian authorities can move their planes from Rostov airspace to safer areas. The reason for this is the possibility of another possible attack, because military analysts and war experts stated that in the big offensive plans of the Ukrainians, there would be some Russian cities in the direction of the Azov Sea and around the Crimea. In fact, these predictions of war experts predate the attacks on Krasnodar. So the predictions were correct. The fact that there was activity again in Krasnodar after the attack on the Russian military airbase in Rostov brought to mind that these estimates were not sufficient and that the offensive operations would continue increasingly. Immediately after the attack in Rostov, residents of the Krasnodar territory found a kamikaze plane on one of the beaches. Apparently, the drone crashed into the water during its flight. The type of drone has not yet been named. However, although no official statement has been made about this until now, its design features and dimensions show that this UAV had a clear resemblance to the Garin drone. The drone looked like it had been in the water for quite some time. However, it's still unknown whether the drone was carrying any explosives. Therefore, it's not yet possible to definitively judge what kind of danger this drone poses. It is assumed that the identity of the UAV and the conditions for its appearance on the coast of the Krasnodar territory will become clear in the near future. It is also suspected that the UAV on the beach in Krasnodar is a Ukrainian drone, because, as we mentioned the previous day, Rostov Air Base was hit in this city. After these suspicious and mysterious situations, Moscow authorities lost control and had to watch the attacks of Russian cities like a spectator. After these dramatic attacks, the Russians transformed Crimea from a popular seaside resort into a military defensive line, with satellite images showing the peninsula overrun with anti-tank barriers and crisscrossed by reinforced trench nets. Because the Russian authorities thought that the axis of the attacks would gradually surround the Crimea, the inhabitants of the peninsula were also quite worried about this possibility, although they did not explicitly state this. As you know, the Russian Ministry of Defense had recently reported that an attack was carried out on the Project 18280 Yuri Ivanov-class intelligence ship Ivan Kurs in the Black Sea, about 90 miles northeast of the Turkish Strait. This offensive operation also managed to keep alive the fears of the Russians in the Azov and Black Sea. With the rise of tension in Crimea and the surrounding regions, Russia aimed to reduce the risk to the lowest level by calling the Navy forces to these regions. For this reason, the Ivan Kurs ship of the Black Sea Fleet continues to fulfill its duties, according to the Russian Ministry of Defense. According to the publication of the Black Sea Fleet, the medium reconnaissance ship Ivan Kurs is returning to Sevastopol. Also, in addition to the attacks on Russian cities, Moscow continued to pursue its invasion plans in Ukraine. Kremlin forces attacked a medical clinic in Dnipro, central Ukraine, killing a 69-year-old passerby and another civilian. Ukrainian authorities reported that more than 20 people were injured, including 2 children. In addition, a Russian S-300 missile struck a dam in the Karlivka district of eastern Ukraine's Donetsk province, putting nearby settlements under threat of severe flooding. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky condemned the explosion in Dnipro as a war crime. After these attacks by Russia, security measures were increased in Ukraine. While the Russians were waiting for an opportunity to continue their attacks, activity began again on the borderlines between Ukraine and Russia. Governor Vyacheslav Gladkov reported that the Belgorod town of Grayvoron, about 7 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, came under fire for several hours with 4 houses, a store, a car, a gas pipeline, and a power line damaged. This city, as we told you at the beginning of the video, is where the Free Russian Legion group carried out their historic offensive operations. In the village of Glotovo, close to the border, an entertainment center, a shop, and an uninhabited house were damaged. According to Gladkov, there were no casualties. Following this week's attack, the governors of Belgorod and Kursk have expressed their support for changing the law to allow local volunteer self-defense units to arm when necessary. In other words, the Russians began to fear because of the attacks that took place in their own cities. Therefore, Russian officials argued that arming such forces could save the defense ministry from having to divert some of the troops it needs on the front line to respond to similar raids in the future. However, the possibility that Russian cities will witness attacks will continue in the coming days, because no Russian city is safe until the war in Ukraine is over. This includes Crimea. Thank you for watching us.